evening, everyone. My name is Denise Grist, and on behalf of Atrium Innovations, I welcome you to this evening's webinar on the UNDA number compound series, session number 1, with Dr. Dixon Tom. The audio portion of this webinar is now available via voice over IP or VIAP or teleconference. Turn up your speakers when joining the webinar, as default audio option is VIAP. To join via teleconference, please use the phone number and the passcode displayed on your screen. The lines will be muted in order to facilitate a smooth flow. Questions will be submitted via the question and answer panel. This is our only form of questions for this evening. Before passing the call to Dr. Tom, I would like to encourage you to take advantage of the discount of 15% off on all of our UNDA number compounds, valid until June 8th, 2020, and can be used up to 4 times. The promo code is UNDA20 and qualifies for free shipping. I would also like to highlight a few aspects of our 2020 education program. Firstly, this webinar is part of a 7-part UNDA compound series. If you've not already done so, please register for the remaining sessions. If you've already registered, you will receive a reminder email from WebEx the Friday before each live event. I'd also like to make you aware that Dr. Nigel Plummer will be conducting an evening intensive on integrative effect of probiotics on the whole body health, emerging evidence and mechanisms, on the following dates and the locations. He's going to be with us in Ottawa, April 14th, in Barrie, Ontario on April 16th, and in Calgary, Alberta on September 23rd. Register now for this evening intensive to take advantage of the early bird price. Also, we have a wonderful one-day intensive on functional immunology, unraveling inflammation and autoimmune dysfunction, including new microbiome research, presented by Dr. Nigel Plummer and Dr. Samuel Yannick. The following dates and locations that they'll be doing this one-day intensive is in Toronto, Ontario on April 18th and in Vancouver, BC on September 26th. I would now like to introduce Dr. Dixon Tom. Dr. Tom is one of the founders and medical directors of the American Center for Biological Medicine and the American Center for Alternative Medicine in Scottsdale, Arizona. He is a graduate of the University of Toronto in dentistry in 1974, the Ontario College of Naturopathic Medicine in Toronto as an ND in 1986, and the National College of Naturopathic Medicine in Portland in 1989. He has been in practice for over 40 years with a primary focus on the management of chronic disease, including autoimmune disease, neurological conditions, gastrointestinal health, and endocrine disorders. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dixon Tom.
Thank you, Denise. Good evening, everyone. As you probably know, there's a lot of people who are willing and looking for the information. So first of all, I have to make a disclaimer. Unfortunately, I've had a cold the last couple of days, so my voice will probably sound a little congested, and hopefully I won't get into a coughing spell or a sneezing spell during this. But if we do, we'll just take a short break and we'll manage that. As Denise said, it's your opportunity over the next few months to, as you learn more about the UNDA numbers, if you're new to this whole modality of therapy, if you are an old hat at doing this type of thing, it's a reminder. I always feel that the more times that you hear this information, the more likely it is that you will start to understand the nuances of the UNDA numbers themselves. So this is information that you should, you can read yourself in general. So what's our goals over the 7 sessions? Mostly because UNDA numbers, while they've sort of been floated around, in fact, they've been around forever. I've been using UNDA numbers for over 20 years, and after being in practice for a long time and being introduced to UNDA numbers, these remedies totally changed my belief system, the aspect of of understanding why people get sick. And the session this evening, you know, there's not that one session is more important than the other, but I think what we'll outline this evening, if you don't grasp the breadth of what the UNDA numbers can do, of what drainage can do, you sort of miss the idea of what UNDA numbers are all about. You know, people always say, well, how do you treat, you know, condition X with an UNDA number? And I said, I don't have any UNDA numbers to treat condition X because we don't treat conditions. What we're doing with UNDA numbers is we're dealing with physics, we're dealing with physiology, we're dealing with biochemistry. So what we're trying to do is not treat any conditions, but we're looking at systems. And it's a system-orientated therapy, and it's very different than what most people have learned, most people use in their practice. I mean, the whole idea in medicine throughout time has been, you know, take a history, find signs and symptoms, find some lab tests, with all this you have condition X. So that's not that important within the numbers, because as we get into the future sessions down the road, the idea is how do we know where do the patients presenting issues stem from? Which organ system do they stem from? Because that's what this whole model of drainage is all about. So we're either going to introduce you to the whole principles of drainage and how it's important in the practice of naturopathic, alternative, biological, whatever form of medicine that you practice. And how do we use drainage in addition to using whatever it is you presently are using? Because obviously you're practicing, you have a specific approach to what it is you're doing. So I can say that the great thing about UNDA numbers is no matter what you're doing, they are not instead of, they are in complement of, and when you use them as a complement or a standalone, they will enhance whatever treatment that you're doing. And having done it for thousands and thousands of patients, I can attest to the assessment. So I'm gonna review this case of a 23-year-old female. And what's important about this case is I need you to mark this, you know, in your PDF file, because in session 3 we're going to come back to this case. So between tonight and, you know, a month from now, I want you to have thought about this case. I want you to say, what would you have done with this particular patient? And remember, we're not trying to figure out what the disease is, because we don't treat diseases. We're trying to look at organ systems. So anyway, this young lady was 13, very athletic, honor student. She was getting sore throats and high fever. She was never diagnosed with anything, but she never really recovered. So they said that she had mono at age 15. She quit sports due to a heart involvement. She started to have brain fog, nausea, massive frequent headaches, a lot of sleep problems. She missed many weeks of school because of the fatigue. She quit the state golf championship and her other daily activities with the brain fog. You know, these things were on her heart palpitations. She was upset. She had diarrhea with mucus. She tried to go to college, but numerous visits to the ER with severe chest pains. Another doctor said, though, she might have chronic fatigue. Then she started passing out, standing up. Then she had panic attacks, and she tried several prescriptions, but nothing changed. In September 12, she started having internal bleeding. She was tried on antivirals. There was no change. Another doc said she must have Lyme disease. She had remembered a tick bite when she was camping at a very young age. The doctor put in a PICC line. She started Rocephin and got deathly ill. In January of 13, she again went on antivirals and antibiotics, went to another doctor who continued those oral antibiotics, but she couldn't function. She had a port put in October 13, IV antibiotics in November. In February of 14, she started on malaria treatment. April of 14, she had her gallbladder removed. The port was not functioning and was replaced, and then she went back on IV antibiotics until the end of July, and she started having involuntary movements and seizures during sleep. So she presented back then and said she was totally desperate. What can you do to help? Now, if I was worried about what disease she had, or I was worried about what's the protocol, you know, I would take a case like that and said, I don't have any clue what I would do. But the beauty of drainage, the beauty of UNDA numbers, so we don't have to know the name of the disease. We have to understand physics, physiology, and biochemistry, because that's the action on which drainage remedies work. They don't try and fix migraine headaches. They don't try and fix any diseases, because so we don't give UNDA numbers for any conditions. We give them for organ systems, and it's an incredibly important aspect to remember. So as I said, please review that, read it over, think about it between tonight and the next session. Think about how would you approach this patient? What would you have done? You know, and you can decide there's no right or wrong answer, obviously, because there's never a right or wrong answer in medicine. That's sort of the art and the skill of medicine. You know, would my approach be better than yours? Probably not, because it's what we learn and how we learn to involve things and how we learn to evolve. So we're going to start off with sort of an overview. So what does the word health mean? You know, we can look at you know, living well despite the inescapable illness and diseases. And can it be true? Is it true that you know, if you're healthy, you shouldn't be getting sick? Well, as I can attest, that's not the case, since I'm sick right now. In fact, minimally, you should be getting sick at least once a year. And kids should be getting sick 3 to 4 times a year. Why? Because that's how they're going to basically build up their systems. If you never get sick, which is one of the worst things a patient could ever tell you, it's usually a sign that your immune system needs a tune-up. So instead of talking about healthy, you know, because you know, as you do, you know, we deal with patients who are very ill, from, you know, the autism spectrum or, you know, genetic issues to people on the other end of the spectrum who have stage 4 cancer of some type. So does that mean we can't help them? Does that mean UNDA numbers are not going to be of, you know, benefit to them? There's nothing we can do for those people who have some really traumatic things. And when we're not worried about the condition, but more interested in biology and physiology, we can do a lot. So I've always felt that, you know, if we have a stage 4 patient, how do we optimize their performance? If we have an autistic, you know, 2-year-old, how do we optimize their performance? If we have somebody, you know, who comes in and, you know, they can't sleep, how do we optimize their performance? So it's always about the condition that it is we're looking for. And so what it means is they do their best every day, and so every day is a new day, and what can I do today? That's what I look at as optimal performance. And I think it's important that we realize as therapists that, you know, while we're typically patients come to us, you know, looking for some support or some help, and I'm not suggesting that you should be the expert in all 7 of these areas, but I think it's important to realize that these areas all play a huge role in balancing physics, biochemistry, and physiology. And some of the areas that you may not be skilled at, you I no doubt have seen people that, you know, the thing that is the greatest imbalance is the job that they're doing. And until they leave that, whatever they're doing, you're going to have a very difficult time. UNDA numbers won't solve that problem, generally speaking. So we have to look at the holistic aspect of the patient in general. If we look at the World Health Organization from, you know, hasn't changed since 1948, complete physical, mental, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Excuse me. Viewed holistically, let's look at everything. Let's look at all 7 dimensions that these people are involved with in their daily lives, because it's what affects their circumstances. What is their belief systems? What is their cultural norms? What is their social, economic, and physical environments? So what we're really talking about, of course, is balance. You know, coined as homeostasis. In reality, it should really be coined homeodynamics and not homeo. And where does the word come from? It comes basically from Bernard, who is the father of physiology. And this is an incredibly important statement. And no matter what you do with any patient, this is really what you should be thinking about. You know, all the vital mechanisms, varied as they are, have but only one object, that of preserving constant the conditions of life in the internal environment. That really is what our role is. As therapists, as doctors, you know, as clinicians, you know, how do we get the internal milieu of the patient in balance because then we let nature take over, and we let nature, take its course in general. So homeostasis, is this dynamic balance in all systems, not only the nervous system, but in every system. And these are 5, but by no means are they all the the internal components of homeostasis. So if you truly focus only on those 5 things, and whatever you do, when you give a treatment, ask yourself, am I somehow changing, improving the O2 concentration versus carbon dioxide concentration? Am I able to look at the pH of the internal environment? What about the concentration of nutrients going in and waste products going out? What about the whole idea of electrolytes, tissue salts, and that type of thing? And what about the volume and pressure in the extracellular fluid? Of course, that's really what our therapies are doing, is in some way they're having an impact on balancing, any of these 5 things. It's also important to remember, there's a lot of talk about acid-base balance and, people doing alkaline diets. But if we really look at the pH of the tissues throughout the body are not the same pH because they're not meant to be the same pH. So, if you want to take somebody's saliva or measure their urine, you say, really, are you trying to get a balance in their pancreas or their bile or connective tissue by doing that? Not really. So we have to look at, I don't like looking at the body as, as an individual system because it really defeats the purpose of what we're trying to achieve. So we now know that, since 2003 when the human genome was uncovered, and shortly a few years later, the whole idea of epigenetics came into play. Now we know it's about the balance of that. And so when genetics, what you got from your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, however many generations it goes back, and then we know it's multiple. And what we can do for our patients from an epigenetics, and what we can do with them to support them on a lifestyle. So, this slide, which is slide 22, I think is a great slide because what it represents, for the most part in medicine, are the specialty medicine. And, people go to specialized medicines because they think they have a problem with their urinary tract or their musculoskeletal system or their circulatory system or their hormones. However, it's impossible to put a patient in balance if you're only looking at one system. So, therefore, it's all systems in balance. And it only takes one system to be out of balance. And we have these multiple levels that we need to look at when we're doing our assessments of our patients to basically, we need to look at all these types of things. The areas that we talked about is the 7 dimensions of health. So do they need detoxification first? Do they need to change their diet first? What cards were they handed genetically? What is their underlying miasm? What is their predisposition towards certain conditions? So if we look at health, the optimal health, the biological processes, if everything is in balance, this is really the simplest, representation that I could ever give, to show a person and to show a patient. So, we have every day, we have normal, healthy function. We have all organs. It's not just the organs listed there. It's every organ system in the body. Now, what we do know on an everyday basis, we're exposed. Unfortunately, right now, the coronavirus pandemic are going to be 26 or 29 countries now have cases of this type of thing. So it's an external factor, and it's an external factor that has an impact on normal, healthy function. So what is supposed to happen? So when our healthy, homeostatic organ systems are exposed to something external, and it doesn't have to be a virus. It could be mental, emotional. It could be physical trauma. It could be in a car accident. The body then needs to respond, and the response of the body is what creates the symptoms. So right now, I have an upper respiratory infection. My nose is congested. I have a sort of a tickle in the back of my throat. So is that the cause of the problem? No, it's the body's reaction to whatever the external thing that I was exposed to. So when that happens, what's supposed to happen next is the body is supposed to discharge. So I've been blowing my nose, I've been coughing up stuff. Right now I have warming socks on my feet. I did a mustard plaster earlier this morning, and I've been taking a bunch of window numbers, et cetera. And then once you go through that stage, the body returns to normal function, and we go back to normal function. Now, what unfortunately happens, however, and hopefully this isn't going to happen all night, if the discharge is insufficient, if the reaction of the body, if it can't create enough inflammation, if it can't create enough mucus, if it can't create enough diarrhea, if it can't create enough of a fever, the body is not able to return back to, on the extreme left, the normal function. And over time, months, years, we develop chronic disease. And we get this slow deterioration of health. And the aspect of, okay, so how long does this go on for? Well, we know historically that in our practices, the most common patients who come to our practice are women over 40 and men over 50, which means this deterioration of health can go on for a very long time before it rises to the occasion and says, okay, we got to do something about this because this is not working anymore. The going to the pharmacy and getting something for mucus or cough is not solving the problem. So we need to look at what we need to then do our individual assessments. And if we look at biological medicine, where we're looking at all these organ systems, we need to figure out ways to analyze it, to identify the systems that are out of balance. We need to be able to educate the patient to what's going on. At that point, the patient becomes much more engaged so that we can actually start a detoxification and stimulation process. And one of the things with drainage, if you're new to it, what you'll find out is if you start drainage too soon, the person will become, will get worse. It took me 50 patients when I started using UNDA numbers, 20 plus years ago, to realize that, oh, this is too stimulating for them. Their organ systems were not in a place yet to be able to eliminate, because as I said, our goal is to create the discharge, to create an inflammation. So we want a fever. We perhaps want a skin rash to come out. We perhaps want diarrhea, not forever, but for a short period of time, because it's a way that the body can eliminate some of these things. And of course, once we've been able to create some of the detox and then start to stimulate it, we can look at how the body will adapt to that, how we can re-regulate it, and how we can regenerate. And the great thing about health now is we know, almost without exception, the body has the ability to regenerate. You put all the right things in place, you have multiple systems in the proper balance, the body is able to regenerate, ultimately leading to healing. So this is really the process. This is the simplest process I can show you of what our patients are all about. And this 8-step process is kind of what I go through with patients and what I've gone through with patients for 40 plus years in medicine, to try and get them to the point to leading to optimal health. Now, optimal health, once again, we could say optimal wellness. Optimal health doesn't mean that you have chronic joint issues, that's a chronic illness, and suddenly you do UNDA numbers and they can straighten their hands. That's not going to happen, because it's beyond. It's exceeded physics. It's exceeded biology. It's it's exceeded physiology. So that's that. And slide 26. I would really hope that you would study that slide, think about it, think about what we're doing with people. We can do 1,001 tests on people, but what are we really doing? How is this test that I'm doing for somebody helping me understand which organ system am I really going to have to deal with? And where is the breakdown in there, from physics, from physiology, from biochemistry in general? So that's, of course, what we're assessing. I like to think that we're not specialists. I certainly would not want to call myself a specialist. I'm not a specialist in anything. But I do know that, if somebody happens to have, a lot of head pain, they just don't walk in with their head. They come attached to the rest of their body. So as you well know, a lot of people who have head pain here, you've got to be looking at their spine because that may be one of the areas that's coming on, or maybe they have a knee problem or a foot problem, or maybe they're having a poor circulation problem, or maybe they have a low pulse ox, or maybe their hormones are out of balance, et cetera, et cetera. So you get the idea that we're looking always at all aspects of this that's going on. So many of you will have seen this before. So we have I don't know how well you can see it on your PDF form, but we have a dark room, we have a window, and below in that little bit of glare, there's a form of a human being. The aspect of of where it's at. So if we close that window, make the room completely dark, the question is, how do you light it up again? And people will say, open the window, open a door, cut a hole, turn on a light a candle, turn on your cell phone, etc. And no matter what answer that you come up with, there's nobody that will ever say, well, why don't you just take the dark out? Because you can't. It's not possible to remove dark. You can only add light. And I use that as an analogy that health is not something where you gain it by taking something away. You only gain health by adding something back in. And that's really what it is that we're looking for. As that statement on the bottom says, in health we are illuminated by the sun. In illness we are shrouded in darkness. So whatever it is that you do therapeutic-wise, if you're trying to remove something, that's not going to bring somebody health. So does that mean a diseased organ should never be removed? No, I'm not saying that, because a diseased organ may be creating so many other imbalances in the person's biochemistry and physiology that that's the only way. Now, can they get to optimal health? No, they can get to optimal performance, and that's really what our goal should be. Our goal isn't to have people live to 120 years old. Our goal is to, whether it's a baby, a teenager, a middle-aged person, or somebody's in their 80s. If they have optimal performance, you've achieved your goal. So I do not believe you can bring health to somebody by taking something away. I do not believe you can give them toxic substances and say, oh, this is going to make you better. By maintaining the state of imbalance, toxicity, and deficiency, you're never going to be able to create health. And also, did you choose your parents well? If you did, is it just a random choice? Is it your genetics? Or is it your reaction to the environment? All these things are important, but the reality is that's not what our role is, at least not what our role is. So, you all studied this in med school, in pathology. What is it? And pathology is simply the end result of the body's attempt to recreate and or maintain homeostasis. Isn't that a different way of thinking about pathology? In fact, when I was still teaching in Portland at NCNM, I, for a long time, tried to change the name of this course and saying, why are we studying pathology? Because if you remove pathology, nothing really changes. Why? Because we're not really dealing with what the problem is. So what are we really talking about? What we're really talking about is adaptive physiology. Now, we all know so much beyond what our body, but our conscious mind knows. The brain will do everything it possibly can to create survival, to create a state, to create a balance, so that it can procreate the species. So really, I think so-called pathology is really adaptive physiology. And I think slide 37 is also a really important thing to think about. So, you perhaps saw, a new patient today, and, they came in and told you a whole bunch of stuff. So when you understand this whole concept of what we're talking about, what they're telling you today is pretty much determining where they're going. But more importantly, it tells you where they came from. So it's not so much worrying about today, it's about where you're going to be in a year, 5 years from now, and how did you get here? How did you get to this point that now you're presenting and telling me you have this, this, and this? So the whole idea of looking at patient management, we understand that the problem started long ago as this energetic imbalance. And what we also know, the beauty of drainage, the beauty of UNDA numbers, is we can reshape the future. We can also rewrite the past. I mean, when I first learned this with Dr. Guinaud in the 1990s, it was like mind-blowing to think we can change. And this was before epigenetics. This is before the genome had even been uncovered. He was talking about the whole idea of reshaping the past, where you came from, the types of things that you were exposed to. So the only reason they're there now is where they came from, which means where they came from is an extremely important part of going into the future. So, patients come in, we have these steps to health from the bottom when somebody passes away, and we're recycling, but these are just samples or examples of the types of things that I think we look at individually with our patients. And, the bottom is where they typically come in. They describe some condition X, and they have, I have sign and symptom Y, and so then you say, well, you're not eating properly, or you're sensitive to food X, Y, and Z, or maybe it's mold sensitivity, or you've been exposed to chemicals in your past, or your elimination systems don't well, you don't detox well, your emunctories are inefficient, et cetera, et cetera. So one way or other through your history, you will ultimately go through that. So if we look at the retroactive, the illness model, it really only focuses on what's above the ground. It focuses on the leaves and the branches, but unfortunately it doesn't focus on the root. But in biological medicine and drainage medicine, we need to take a much more proactive wellness and optimal performance state. And in fact, it does not focus on branches and leaves, but rather it focuses on, more importantly, the roots more than the leaves. So why do people get ill? And if we were in a room and we asked a question, these are the types of things that you would come up with. And of course, right now, if we went on the street and asked people, they would say number 6 because the coronavirus, everybody says, oh, you get sick because of your viruses. Well, yeah, that's one of the reasons, but it's only one of the reasons. And in fact, are these the reasons? I don't believe so. I believe that these are not reasons. I believe that these are triggers. They're not the real cause because they don't address anything about homeostasis. They don't address anything about that. So we really need to be looking at, and over the course of managing your patients, we should be looking at where, once again, the past. How did they get here? So there was something that happened long before they started experiencing a sign or symptom. And as that suggests, there's emotional issues, mental emotional issues. For those of you who do Chinese medicine, obviously from the whole Chinese perspective, there's the meridian imbalances. And, something that I'm really keen on is the person's miasm, their temperament and their constitution. And when you study drainage, some point along the line, from my perspective, if you don't understand miasm, temperament, and constitution, you're going to get a patient so far, but you're never going to get them to, in my opinion, to their level of optimal wellness. So those, I believe, are more importantly. So we can look at these types of things as being mechanistic, and people, well, that's why you get sick. But the reality is, this is the real reason that people get sick. It's simply a violation of nature's laws. And if we look way back, and asked, well, what are some of nature's laws in regards to health? This is, if you look back when that was written, 1882, so 140 years ago, Dr. Oswald said, why, with nature's laws is what you eat, what you do, how often are you outdoors, what's your indoor life, are you going to the gym every day? Yes, they had gyms in those days too. What clothing were they wearing? How good was their sleep? What did you do for relaxing, and what was your hygiene? It hasn't changed, has it? It's the same type thing. And then, of course, in 1912, which is now 108 years ago, Dr. Lindlar wrote, and hopefully, if you haven't read it, I think that's a great book to find. You'll probably find it on Amazon for free, since it's long out of print in general. Continuous violation of nature's laws, such as excessive eating, too much alcohol, coffee, tea, overwork, night work, fear, worry, poor air quality, lack of exercise, loveless marriages, is viewed as the primary causes of continued health degeneration. Wow, 108 years ago. So I think it's fair to say that there's nothing different in 2020 than there was in 1912. In fact, we could have gone to 1812 and said the same thing. We could have gone back even further. And some of you probably are familiar with Maslow's work. So he said, what are the basics that all 7 billion people on this planet require, which is the physiologic aspect of what's on the bottom. And of course, each of the ascending part of that pyramid adds a little bit more to creating a balance or a homeostasis for a person. But the focus this evening is the bottom. Breathing, food, water, sex, sleep, homeostasis, and excretion. And that's all people. Every single person that you ever see, that is the basis of their physiology. That is the basis of their adaptive physiology. And so it's this attempt to recover health by eliminating obstacles to healing. So we know that there's many, many, many triggers. And people keep, sometimes you go down rabbit holes looking for what those triggers are, thinking that, oh, never well since. Well, the never well since, unfortunately, comes from pre-birth because your terrain is determined pre-birth. In fact, it's determined several generations pre-birth. And so if the word miasm, sauropsychosis, syphilis, and tuberculosis, and temperament and constitution is new to you, then that's going to be an area as you go forward with your careers that I think is worthy of studying, because when you really understand what's happening as far as a person's terrain is concerned, it becomes pretty easy to understand the types of problems that patients have over time. So that, and so, and any, whether a person says, oh, I had a concussion when I was such and such, or I was in a car accident, or I moved a lot, or I was really sick and they never figured out why I was sick. Whatever it was, it doesn't really matter. It matters from the aspect of knowing that. But people always say, well, I'm never well since. Epstein-Barr, it's a common one now. Oh, never well since I've had Epstein-Barr. Well, everybody has Epstein-Barr for all intents and purposes. So why does everybody have the problem? It's because of their terrain. It's the terrain that determines how the trigger impacts an individual person. So you can have 4 different people, expose them to exactly the same irritant, trigger, and you'll have 4 different reactions. So the reaction is not determined by the virus. The reaction is not determined by the trauma. The reaction is not determined by the emotional state. It's not determined by the environment. It's not determined by the genetics. It's determined by how we respond to our terrain. So therefore, the greatest challenge that our physiology faces is how do we manage toxicity. So we know that we talk about it, and of course we don't want toxins. Now, just yesterday, I think the FDA is finally going to start investigating in makeup asbestos and the talc, I think. Obviously, we say, well, it causes cancer. I said, well, does it? No, I don't think so. I mean, it may be contributing a component to that. But what it's really contributing to is chronic illness. Remember, we're talking about chronic disease, chronic illness for what's going on, for what these people are exposed to. So what's a toxin? If we look at the dictionary, it basically is something, the dictionary simply said they're toxic to the human body. And it comes from, in 1888, which was 140 years ago, was introduced into the world of medicine in general. So we know that what it does is it somehow interferes with these metabolic activities of a living organism. So that's very unstable. The normal physics, the normal physiology, the normal biochemistry is not able to function. Therefore, it induces some type of an imbalance in the system. Now, we always look at the whole idea of, outside, exogenous toxicity. But let's be real. The number one toxin that you, me, and every one of our clients are exposed to are endogenous. It's from cellular metabolism. Our body constantly, our mitochondria are constantly producing, and every other cell in our body, 10 to the 13 cells in our body, basically are producing waste products, thousands and thousands and thousands of reactions every instant that's going on. Now, it's fine if you can get them out, It's not fine if you can't get them out. And that's when we can create a tremendous amount of toxicity. But yes, we should recognize that exogenous types of things that, our cellular metabolism cannot deal with. So that's toxic substances, it's pesticides, it's insecticides, it's heavy metals, it's all those types of things. But let's also not overlook the whole idea of emotional, as I'll mention here. So 11 million chemicals, there's probably 21 million chemicals. The reality is they just keep adding new chemicals. And is it going to make our state any better? No, of course not, unfortunately. So there's over 10,000 chemicals allowed in the food supply. Wow, we're eating a lot of stuff. It's not us, isn't it? So it's not just a physical substance, but likely the most harmful toxin in regard to health. And I have to say that, and perhaps you have in your clients also, it's more so than physical, it's emotional toxicity. So, I found this picture and I drew a line across the top. And what I found with my patients is if you live above the line, the chances of you more easily moving back towards a place of balance, of homeostasis, is going to be much easier than if you live below the line. Toxic thoughts are a leading contributor in deterioration of health. So, we want to live in joy and serenity and trust and acceptance with, that type of thing. And so these are, these reactions, these emotional toxicity, are a result of our learned perceptions. And where do our learned perceptions come from? Our learned perceptions come from those that surround us from the time we were conceived, until we leave home. Let's say we go to college at 17. All that is forming our learned perceptions. So your parents and grandparents and siblings, talked a lot about sadness and surprise and awe and disgust and contempt and grief. There's a better likelihood that those will be part of your vocabulary. So, when a patient comes in and may have been there, the goal is, can we change some of those words? Can we change the words directly with intention? Using more words like abundant and beautiful and creative and expanding and kind and loving and receptive. Adding those words into our everyday vocabulary. Adding those words into our, living environment so that we can move past where it is that we are. To remove a toxin, we need to be able to recognize it, of course. Our body does. We need to be able to then neutralize it, and we need to be able to eliminate it. But in addition to that, we need physical rest. There's a reason that we need 8+ hours of sleep and not 5 hours and then drink 3 pots of coffee from Starbucks. We need physiologic rest, and now with intermittent fasting, I'd say it's becoming more popular, but it's certainly more aware. We're starting to understand the science of the physiologic rest. And, if people can go 16 hours and not eat, for example, so, they eat in an 8-hour window and fasting for a 16-hour window, there's now a bunch of scientific studies showing the very positive effects that has on our physiology. But it's also important that we have a rest our brain, which is our mental rest. So where are these toxins stored? Of course, in the extracellular matrix, which surrounds all our cells in our body. And what is it? It's this material, it's actually, beneath the epithelial, beneath our skin, which basically has a major role in shaping cells and cell migration and differentiation and that type of thing. So what are some of the functions of the matrix? Are to transport things around. It's also where a lot of toxicity gets stored. And we now know that the cells can talk to each other. So many lifestyle choices, unfortunately, will damage the extracellular matrix, including published, 15 years ago in Lancet. Now how many times do we look at our patients and say, yes, we need to look at your diet. Yes, you're not getting enough sleep, or you're sleeping at the wrong time of day. You're not moving. You're not having sufficient movement. We want to call it exercise. Are people substituting coffee or water for coffee or soda or whatever else they're drinking? And how do we learn to manage our stress in general? So these factors, of course, will create free radical damage. And once again, it's published in Lancet a number of years ago. It's not, and all we know is we know more about this now than ever for what's going on. So the body obviously has to get rid of that, and that's the whole beauty of doing drainage. the whole idea of detox and depuration, which we'll make note of, is also a component that we need to think about. It's interesting when you look at the definition of the word detox, it says the process of detoxifying. It doesn't really define it. I can use the part of the word to define what the word is. So anyway, it's the metabolic process by which these toxic qualities of a poison and toxins are changed. And we know that the main thing there is the liver. Man. Phase 1, phase 2, you know, which we all studied and, you know, are studied forever. So we can look at how do we, you know, minimize these types of things. So this detox, it involves obviously dietary and lifestyle changes to try and eliminate, first of all, what the toxin is, and then to get it out of our body. It goes without saying that we're exposed to everyday things that were, you know, that are a problem for us. You know, people who have chemical sensitivity will probably be challenged by, you know, perfumes or going into the soap oil at the grocery store, that type of thing. So fiber, water, you know, depuration is to, by definition, is to make the body free of impurities. You know, or Merriam-Webster says the purification of impurities. It's to cleanse and purify. Now, one of the things that Dr. Guinaud always, you know, emphasized is, you know, when you use depuration techniques, what you end up doing is unfortunately, you end up exceeding physiologic limits, which means you're putting a real strain on the body and adding more stress to the body to try and go beyond that, and then you have to sort of come back and try and improve it. So the idea of specifically, we know that there's a number of medications that can, such as whether it's an antibiotic or whatever, that can create the imbalance. But, you know, what we really are interested in talking about is drainage. And as Dr. Guinaud said the definition was, it's a physiologic action. And it's a physiologic action that facilitates the organism to eliminate toxins without exceeding the physiology, so that we actually step steps forward and one step back.
That's right.
Going on.
Showing up here.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, somebody, I don't know if it's Steve, but somebody has unmuted. Oh.
Yeah, look, it's too complicated.
Hi, Dr. Tom. We're contacting Bill to try and get that muted for us.
Okay. Thanks. So, you know, and we also should look at, you know, what Murray wrote. And he actually wrote the book in 1956, and it was, actually it was Clement, and Maury translated it in 65. And so, you know, the definition of drainage compared to detox is the sum total of therapeutic means houses the body, ensure elimination through our natural channels, through our natural emunctories. So it's this process of recognizing, neutralizing, and then removing. It sounds pretty easy, but of course it can get pretty complicated. So we know that detox is a part, depuration can be a part. You know, I always feel that you should never start any aggressive therapy until you know that you can assure that drainage has been put in place, because if you do, you're bound to stir things up and unfortunately make them much worse. Hopefully the word emunctories is not a new term for you, but if it is, it's really any organ by definition that eliminates things to the outside, serving to carry things out of the body. These are sort of typical organs of emunctories in one way or the other that we're familiar with. So, you know, this old slide that I developed many years ago, we look at primary emunctories on the left side of the slide and the secondary emunctories on the right side. So if a person comes in, like me right now, if I was to go and see my doctor, who understood this, so the primary emunctories, lungs, kidney, GI, skin, emotions, if those are working efficiently, we don't have to carry over to the secondary emunctories. Secondary emunctories more often involve skin, Well, skin's in both places. Well, on the primary among trees, it's sweat. On the secondary among trees, it's a rash. Joint pain, musculoskeletal soreness, etc. Sinus congestion like I have right now, nasal congestion, tickle in my throat, mental, emotional changes. So anything that imbalances those types of things can create this imbalance. And so over time, that bucket fills up, of course, and when the bucket starts to overflow, that's either because the primary among tree is blocked or clogged or something wrong there, and so we start using secondary among trees to eliminate things. And it just shows that, where are most of these, eliminated? We always think of the skin as the largest organ. However, from a detox perspective, we look at the digestive tract, which if you're laid out cell by cell, is about the size of a tennis court. So tremendous amount of drainage ability, but let's not overlook what the brain is capable of doing. So drainage is this process of detoxifying by opening among trees, making them more efficient. This is cleansing. It enhances everything else, as we said earlier. It's not done instead of something else that you do. It's appropriate to be implemented in conjunction with other therapies, and it can be efficiently accomplished using the UNDA numbers, which is what our whole seminar is about. So how can we help the patient on this healing journey? I'm going to have, if you don't feel brushed up on physiology, biochemistry, and physics, go back and read your old Guyton, because believe it or not much of that has changed. We know a lot more about the body, but if you read a book from the 1800s, it amazes me how much they knew, how much they understood, even without all our very sophisticated science and scientists that are present. So, some of you have taken some of my other seminars. I will show this particular slide, which is slide 89, to my patients, and I equate health to sort of I call it the river of health. And, the whole goal is to try and understand what is this journey along the river of health. So we'll say that when we're conceived, we're up in the mountains. It's pristine. It's clear. We hear the birds. There's not a lot of toxicity. There's not a lot of, it's a relaxed type thing in the ideal world. And then as time goes on, we float down the river. Unfortunately, towards the end of our life, we end up at the bottom of the river. So, and then we have all these different stages. And so every patient who comes in to see you will be somewhere on the river. And depending how far down the river they are, will be more of a challenge to try and get them back up the river, because the goal I have is how do we get patients back up to where they came from? How do we restore them from the past of where they came from to restore their physiology, understanding, once again, their terrain, to be able to do that type of thing. So in order to get all our organs in balance, the body has developed critical systems that will permit all cells to identify and receive appropriate nutrition, while at the same time allowing it to eliminate and detoxify. So there are these basic treatment guidelines. Some of you will have, know about them, and I'll share something that I have written, which is the basic treatment guideline protocols. You may call it something else. It's a 59-page scientifically, researched aspects of following natural laws. So natural laws, of course, don't treat any disease, because they can't. They're not about treating disease. But they can do, they are known to support and improve health. So they do support all the body's primary and essential components. So as Voltaire said, what we're really up to is just to amuse the patient while the body heals itself. Going back to what Maslow says, we have the physiologic needs, safety needs, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization, sort of in that pyramid idea. But what we're talking about, if you don't deal with the physiologic needs on the bottom, if you start worrying about spiritual enlightenment and that type of thing, maybe you have found that. I certainly have, that, if somebody comes in and they're saying, wow, I'm looking for, some purpose of what life is, but their physiologic needs are not being met, it's like, well, if we don't have a strong base, it's going to be very difficult to reach the top of what that pyramid is in general. So that's the same slide I showed you before. So basic human needs. You know, people meet their own needs relative to their own priorities. You know, this is Maslow stuff. Although basic needs generally must be met, some needs can be deferred. Failure to meet needs results in one or more homeostatic imbalances, which eventually, unfortunately, as we are talking about, results in ill health. And, you know, the next time you have a new patient and you listen to their story, start asking yourself, how did they get here, as I said? Where did the imbalance start occurring that they started, you know, came into you and started telling you a bunch of different signs and symptoms? A need can make itself felt by either external or internal stimuli. A person who perceives a need can respond to it in several ways, and the needs, of course, are interrelated. So this is my basic treatment guidelines, and you know, it's what I outlined here. And this actually is available for $10 if you wish to purchase it. It's a PDF file that you can, which you can get. And, you know, I might as well say that the other thing at this point, too. And where do you get it? You get it from my website, which is hbbhealth.net. And what you can also get is my UNDABook, per se. And so if you go to hbbhealth.net, and on the left-hand side of the website, it says categories, and the top thing says books. You can see the book, and you can see the basic treatment guideline one, if that's of interest to you. So these are, you may have different ones, but basically I'm following what Maslow said and what people have said, and, you know, long before I read Maslow's stuff, it's like, you know, this is, and the order that they are kind of is what I've come to prioritize. It's like, if you want to do one thing every day, I have prioritized it to just get outside. We live in most of the pollution that our patients experience are in their house. In fact, 80% of all toxicity is experienced in a person's house, not in the outside environment. So we'll go over those briefly. So get outside, ideally. I mean, I'm in a very fortunate place. I live in Arizona. We have over 300 days of sunshine. Some of you, I believe, no doubt are in the Northeast and in Canada. And there's a big snowstorm and rainstorm, and it's like not too sunny today. But you have to as much as you can, because all the research has shown that when you get outside, and you don't have to be in the sun, you don't have to, you know, sunbathe per se. It's getting outside is what a goal should be ongoing. It's an ongoing thing. This is one that patients have a lot of problems with. Because I'll ask them, what did you do yesterday to have fun? And they sort of sit there with a blank stare and, huh? What do you mean? Well, what did you do that wasn't part of your everyday duties? You looked after your kids, you made meals, you did the laundry, you went to work, you drove here, you drove there. Was it fun, or was it just by duty? Yeah, well, some people say, well, work is fun. Yeah, but I think we need to broaden it to something that doesn't involve our everyday type of activity. So find something. The rule is, have fun, laugh every day, laugh with your patients, no matter what their challenges are. They deserve a good laugh. If you're not a good joke teller, just find some way to amuse them. Obviously, the whole idea of yoga and, you know, a lot of those types of practices, qigong, etc. It's not the poses so much; it's the breathing that's really the most important part of this. So, you know, this is just one example of doing deep breaths, but, you know, if you do one of those disciplines, whatever you want to teach your patients, the whole idea, we take somewhere between 15 and 17,000 breaths a day. Surely we can consciously take 100 deep breaths a day. Not a lot, and if you use, I just have patients put a sign on their fridge, on their car dashboard, on their bathroom mirror. It says breathe. So they stop for, you know, 10 seconds and take a deep breath. We look at body composition, and of course we look in both men and women. Body composition is mostly water. It's not about you know, the rest. And here's a chemical composition of the body: 62% water, 16% protein, 1% carbs. 16% fat, 6% minerals. So guess what the most important thing is that we need to take into our body is water. So, you know, as we just said, but we'll say about 60%. Infants, it's higher than that. And the body composition does depend on gender and our fitness level and that type of thing. Males are usually a little bit higher than females, 60, 55. Overweight men and women have more water as percent than the leaner counterparts. The percent of water depends on their hydration rate. People feel thirsty when they have already lost, that's an important statement, when they have already lost 2 to 3% of their body water, which means that people are waiting to drink to be thirsty. They're already dehydrated. And more importantly, mental performance and physical coordination starts to become impaired when a person is only 1% dehydrated. So when people talk about brain fog and I'm sore and this and that, how much water do you drink? And I'm not talking coffee, I'm not talking, you know, wine or soda or something. How much water do you drink? We truly want, you know, how much water, this is just a general rule of thumb. Obviously it doesn't apply if somebody has congestive heart failure or, you know, kidney issues or whatever, but in general, half your body weight in ounces, half your body weight in pounds in ounces, generally. And, you know, you can look, and water has, of course, a million functions throughout our body. You know, and an interesting one is, look at how much water is in our brain. So if you're dehydrated, you know, one of the first tissues that becomes affected is your brain. So it's, you know, you can't emphasize enough that the person truly needs to be drinking clean, have a clean water source. But most organs, other than our bones, have, you know, over 75% water, which, you know, really your heart is 78% water. Isn't it just a muscle? Yeah, between the cells. So water, water, water. This one is we'll call it a beef of mine, but, you know, something I'm sure as you do, you know, a lot of people come in, you read about all this stuff, you know, move 30 minutes a day, get on the treadmill, you know, go to the gym or whatever. So I stopped telling people to exercise, and I'm really started to tell them that all I want you to do is move, because I have this term we call functional fitness. So functional fitness is about training your body as an entire unit instead of muscle by muscle. It's about training your body to move in a way in which you move everyday life, bending, lifting, throwing, reaching, twisting. So I'll say to a person, when you're 75, what would you like to be able to do? And what do they say? Well, I'd like to bend over and put my shoes on. I'd like to be able to sit on the toilet and get off the toilet. If I dropped something on the floor, I'd like to pick it up. You know, if something weighs 3 pounds, I'd like to be able to pick it up. I'd like to be able to reach over my head. I said, well, tell me how that is, what that has to do with you going to the gym and thinking you can bench press 200 pounds. There's nothing to do with it. So the rule of thumb is, whatever activity you're doing, the goal is that it's training you so as you get older, you will continue to be able to be flexible enough to, you know, use your joints and your muscles. And so, you know, I'll ask a person, what do they do for movement or exercise, if that's what they prefer? If they go to the gym, they get on the treadmill or the elliptical or for 30 minutes. I said, perfect. Get on the elliptical for 30 minutes. And then what I want you to do, I want you to stop for 10 minutes. I want you to get back on the elliptical and do it for another 30 minutes. They said, well, I can't do that. I said, well, then you're already exceeding your physiologic limits. You are damaging your tissue. You're exceeding physiology. That's not what you want to do if you want to move your body, you know, so that when you're 75 or 80, you can get off the toilet and tie your shoes. So I would say, so cut your elliptical to 15 minutes. Wait 10 minutes, and then do it again. And if it's fine, then the next time do it for 17 minutes. And so how do we improve our stamina? We don't exceed our physiological limits, but of course, as your body gets more in shape, as we're exercising, you know, our entire muscular structure, everything is being tuned at the same time. So I really prefer this. I know you probably, like I do, have fanatics who run marathons, and I said, well, could you stop in 10 minutes and run it again? Well, of course not. I said, well, unless you're going to the Olympics or unless you somehow need to do that for your job, I don't know if that's really in your best interest as a doctor telling you physiologically, what are you doing to your physiology? Because what I have seen is that people who do that, unfortunately, I have 20-year-olds, you know, who are doing CrossFit, not to pick on CrossFit, but have done, and if I look at their physiology and biochemistry, I said, you know, your biochemistry looks like you're 75 already, but you're only 25. You well exceeded your physiologic limits. So you need to be able to recover within about 10 minutes, repeat the exercise, and if you can't, then you have to back it off. So the best activity, I always believe, is walking. You know, walk with your partner, or, you know, my dog is pretty lazy, and that's how I walk her, as you see in that picture there. And if you've never seen this little YouTube thing by Dr. Mike Evans, I really encourage you to look at it. It's called 23.5 hours, and it's about 8.5 minutes long. And I tell patients to look at this. If you want to know the best, of course, you know, the kind of people I'm dealing with, if I was dealing with, you know, professional athletes and, you know, and their job, I mean, they're not going to be walking, they're building muscle per se, but as we well know, they pay a price for that. But for the average Joe Blow person who's coming to see us, have them watch 23.5 hours. You'll be very fascinated by what he says. And more importantly, no matter what activity you do, you should finish the activity by extending your spine. There are so many injuries physiologically to the body by flexion and not extension of the body. So even if you're doing yoga, many yoga poses are flexion. You want to always end by simply line a big medicine ball or just literally extend your spine. Hydrotherapy goes without saying. I think the big thing with hydrotherapy on an everyday basis is the removal of a shower head, so you can take it off and spray specifically, alternating hot and cold. I mean, I'm wearing the warming socks right now, as I said, so different types of baths. So any, you know, hydrotherapy. Lymphatic system we don't talk about enough. You know that basically it has about 3 times more fluid in it than the blood system does. There's no pump. Basically, it's by moving your muscles around. Basically, this is your main cleansing system, much more than your cardiovascular system is. So we need to be moving lymph on an everyday basis because it's an important aspect of drainage. You know, things, deep breathing, daily movement, castor oil packs, dry skin brushing, lymphatic massage, you know, machines, Lymph Stars, Hemasonics, ST8s, etc. So castor oil, I don't just do over the liver. I basically do the entire chest. I've done several of those. I also did a mustard plaster today. So, you know, and I think the biggest mistake that people make with castor oil is they use way too much castor oil. You know, you basically, when you put some castor oil on that flannel cloth, when you touch it, it should basically be, you know, a little bit oily, but, you know, otherwise it shouldn't be a big issue per se. But people saturate the thing, you can wring it out. Of course, it's a mess, you put it on, it's running all over the place. You should be able to take that off and go, yeah, there's no oil there. In fact, I would say leave it on, put a sweatshirt on top, let it soak in. It's actually much more effective. And then we have dry skin brushing, ideally done at night, basically starting at the feet. We come up, so moving everything to the thoracic duct, which of course is right here, just under the collarbone on the left side. Just wherever you can reach, close your eyes. This is the lightest touch you can use. Phenomenal types of therapies. Goes without saying that we live in a society that doesn't get enough sleep, unfortunately, because people think they don't have time to have 8 hours of sleep because they're too busy, which unfortunately is ridiculous. And the ideal time, as that clock says, is ideally to be, preferred time, which is also very difficult in our society, is to be in bed and asleep between 10 and 11. Why? Because it follows natural physiologic laws of when cortisol is going down and growth hormone is going up. And as we know, growth hormone is when we're healing. Cortisol is basically suppressing healing. And if you only sleep 6 hours, you're really missing some of the most important aspects of sleep. I always say sleep in total darkness, and if your bedroom is such you can't get it, then wear a mask. You shouldn't turn on lights if you have to get up to go to the bathroom, and definitely take all your Wi-Fi stuff out of your room. Turn it off. And this is probably one of the newer ones that have been added, probably only in the last 5 years or so. is raising the head of the bed 4 inches or so. You know, and it comes from an English physicist, I think, who, you know, as a layperson, you know, raised the question, how do those leaves on that tree get any nutrition? And they certainly don't get it from the air. They get it from the roots, which we said is the critical part. In other words, it's going against gravity. So we all think, oh, you know, if we're faint, we put our head down. But the reality is when we raise the head of our bed a few inches, we actually change osmotic pressures, and almost anything from the waist up will be improved, so from a lymphatic and circulation-wise. It's a great habit to have, generally. We know meditation now is, you know, people used to think meditation, oh, I have to, you know, and sort of in the pose. But the reality is you can do it sitting at your desk, you know, at any time. Just take a few minutes, and you know, 5 minutes of praying, 5 minutes of doing meditation for a person, pretty much as that slide suggests, helps every single organ system, which is really what we're attempting to do. So my summary of natural laws: get outside, do something fun, deep breathing, and showers in a cool spray, move somehow, do casserole packs, you know, as appropriate. Try skin brushing, and I do it before bed because that's when we want the lymph to be the most active. Try and be in bed by 10, sleep by 11, raise the head of the bed, you know, 4 inches or so, and prayer and meditation. And, of course, a big part of what we do with all our clients is what do they eat? And there's 101 diets, the ketogenic diet now, the intermittent fasting. The research shows that the more colors you have, pretty dramatic effects on a number of health issues. So I include EFAs, probiotics, vitamins and minerals, et cetera. So these are just some basic eating suggestions. Still like to recommend apple cider vinegar for people. You know, take your time, smell the food cooking. It's stimulating CCK to tell the digestive system to start, you know, being active and moving. Put your fork down between bites. You know, don't drink with meals. Give thanks before eating. Take away all distractions when you're eating, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, the basic rules. So, you know, whatever the choice is, you know, however, whether it's plant-based or, you know, ketogenic or vegan or vegetarian, you need to customize it to the individual. These are some of the examples that people have on slide 130. Colors is really probably, the more colors you can get, as this study basically suggested, it can reduce cardiovascular, cellular health, homeostasis, and preferred optimal. And, you know, it used to be the colors, it used to be 5, and then the colors of the rainbow, and now the researchers from a couple of years ago are suggesting 10 different colors. So in February, almost exactly, 3 years ago now, almost exactly 3 years ago. So you can look up that if you want to read the whole study and see the benefits of eating lots of different colors for people. So we, you know, when we have working on the basics, as we said, which is part of the big triangle of allowing people to get to their place of optimal performance. So we have basic support, which is the things I just basically talked about. In your therapy protocols, you will add specific therapies with vitamins and minerals or GMOs and UNDA numbers and things. If you do a lot of body work or refer for body work, that'll be part of it also. They may also be for neurofeedback or meditation or whatever. And, you know, if we get to the bottom line and need to take a prescription, we take a prescription. If you need surgery, you do surgery, and you refer them. And so, you know, you can basically customize your therapies to, you know, all what's going on in that particular arena of things that are happening. So there's a reminder once again of what you know, of the specials that you have, then take advantage of. You can, as Denise said, you can take advantage of that 4 times between now and June. So as we go through the different presentations of things, it will allow you to you know, think about that. But so I want to reemphasize several of these points. We do not treat disease with drainage. We do not treat disease with UNDA numbers. So people, and so if when we get to the questions in a few minutes, if somebody says, how do you treat condition X? I'll say I have no idea, because I don't know how to treat any conditions with drainage remedies. All I know is how can I try and understand and create the sense of imbalance that a patient is experiencing, and how did they get to this place of where they're sitting in front of me. Yes, we need to do things that are palliative. You know, if somebody has a lot of head pain, you can't say, well, let's get all these things in order and then we'll worry about your head pain. It doesn't work that way. However, since our goal is not just to palliate the person, to make them feel better, our goal is to understand the physiologic process, to understand physics, to understand the laws of nature, to understand, you know, the laws that are subject to every person in the entire universe for what's going on. It's balancing those. And if you ever wish you understood physiology well when you were in med school, it's the perfect time to look at it again. Because, as I said, even if you were in med school like I was 50 years ago, 50 years ago this year I started, you know, it's like, wow, the physiology there is actually the same physiology as it is now. Yeah, there's a few, you know, things, but for the most part, that part, the body hasn't changed how it functions. It's changed to the fact that we have different pathologies, but the pathology, once again, is only adaptive physiology. So we're going to never mention the disease. We're never going to say that we use drainage or UNDA numbers to treat diseases, but it doesn't mean that you can't treat a patient who has condition X to condition Y and anything in between, because all we are attempting to do is to support the natural physiology to the point that we can create what we're called this optimal performance, optimal wellness. So, you know, I used to think that, you know, when I studied with Dr. Guinaud in the 90s, and oh my God, these people are going to live to 120. But then, you know, that's not the goal, because when you look at all the 7 dimensions of why people get sick, there's other components, and some people don't have to be here till 120. They've accomplished what they needed to accomplish. You know, their sense of purpose has been achieved, and if their sense of purpose has been achieved, then they can move on to wherever they're going to the next place. But the beauty of UNDA numbers is we don't need to focus. Yes, you know, you look at that slide and, you know, the 1 and the 20 and then the 243, very common. In fact, if you're new to UNDA numbers, that's going to be one of your most likely, one of the very first prescriptions you'll use for people, because it's not really based on emunctories. It's based on the liver and kidney for the most part. And as we said, those are 2 of the primary emunctories. And very often when a person, you know, has been traveling down the river over a period of time, they're at a point where the over-the-counter medications are not providing the relief that they're looking for. So they'll read the box and says, oh, this says it's for so-and-so. I said, well, it says something on the box because, you know, you have to in order to be able to sell it, per se. But we don't think about it like that. We think about it as what organ systems are we most focused on, what organ systems would benefit the most at this time with this particular individual based on their long-term issues that they're experiencing. So, Denise, I think, what's the next one? Yeah, so obviously we have upcoming seminars, but let's stay on that one. And so if anybody has typed in any questions, sort of to re-explain or explain better than I did the first time through, and as I said when we started, I really encourage you to look over these 135 slides. The basis of health, the basis of the body improving, getting back to a place of balance and homeostasis, is not based on what's the latest, greatest research that says product X, you know, treats condition Y. Because obviously there's no research within the numbers, because we don't treat conditions, we treat physiology. For those who are not familiar, the UNDA numbers have been around for over 100 years. They only became popular in the last 50 years, mind you. But you know, from that arena and that perspective of things, of what the body is doing, they have a long historical history for what's going on. So I'll leave it at that, for at least for the moment, unless I think of something else, unless Denise has something to ask me.
Yes, Dr. Tom, thank you so much for tonight's question and answer period for everyone. I will be dedicating questions without going into specific UNDA numbers. I've had a couple of questions, as Dr. Tom will be training us on these in upcoming sessions. Questions that are not answered tonight have been saved for following sessions, but if you have any questions that you need right away, you can always contact us, your account representative. So, Dr. Tom, the first question tonight from a participant is, can you explain again the difference between detoxification and drainage and what the difference is?
Absolutely. So detoxification is a process that goes on by natural physiology. So as you studied in med school and you looked at, you know, the 1,001 functions that the liver has, specifically phase 1, phase 2. So detoxification is technically to make something less toxic to the body so that it doesn't have a negative impact on the physiology. So detoxification is an everyday process. So we talk about, you know, oh, we're going to do this detox, you know, after Christmas or in the spring or in the fall or whatever, you know. The reality is you're not really doing a detox because detox is happening all the time. What you really need to be doing is drainage, because what drainage does is it facilitates the natural physiologic process of detox, which is the liver and every other organ breaks down things. So drainage is the idea that you open, facilitate the 5 natural emunctories, the kidney, as we said, the lungs, the skin, the GI and liver, and the brain. If those 5 areas are working efficiently from a homeostasis perspective, then secondary emunctories are rarely an issue. So right now, I'm using my secondary emunctories. And what does it tell me? I've been doing too much lately, too much stress, you know, or whatever type thing. You know, so, but it happens. But as I said, we're supposed to get sick once or twice a year anyway, so I'm not bothered or upset by the fact that, you know, it's just the way it is for what's going on. So drainage is a physiologic process that facilitates the detox reaction that's naturally happening, and it does not exceed physiologic limits, which is the main way we differentiate it from depuration, which does exceed physiologic limits. So an example of depuration, for example, would be IV therapy. So IV therapy, so, you know, a person has a specific condition and you do an IV therapy. So you say they have heavy metals. So in order to get the heavy metals in, you do some form of chelation, let's say. Well, in order to get that stuff out, you have to exceed physiologic limits, which means you put an extra strain on your body. So I would say, well, instead of doing that, why don't you focus on the detox natural processes and do drainage so you don't exceed physiologic limits? You'll end up with the same result. Now, mind you, drainage will take longer because we're not exceeding physiologic limits. But the positive thing is you also won't have adverse effects. You also won't have negative effects, because often when people are doing chelation, they're then told to go back the next day and say, oh, well, we're going to do a Myers and put some more minerals back in because we know what we took out. Probably took out too many. We don't know exactly what we put out. Well, let's just put these back in and maybe it'll help you. So we're playing this, you know, this yo-yo or this teeter-totter type thing that's going on. It's a really important distinction to understand. Detox, natural physiology, drainage supports the natural 5 emunctories that the body needs to eliminate the waste products that are formed every single day in the body, every single instant in the body. And I think that's probably one of the, if not the main reason why the UNDA numbers are so helpful and so successful. Once again, no matter what therapy you presently are using, I can guarantee you, if when you add UNDA numbers to whatever you're doing, you will find your treatments are so much more successful. And they're more successful more quickly. And it's not like you get sort of an instant, an instant recovery. When you support natural physiology, as long as we don't exceed the limits, because when you exceed the limits, we end up with adverse effects. So, for example, when I first started doing UNDA numbers and was all excited about it, back in the 90s, let's just say, because those three numbers are there, 120 and 243, I would give a person that, but I never talked about natural laws. I never talked about castor oil. I never talked about, drinking more water and moving their body. And I just said, here, take these UNDA numbers. They're going to do miracles. And, my resident at the time, which who knew was it 25 years ago, but invariably on day 3, the patient would call and say, I don't think this is working. I have a really bad headache. What do you mean you have a bad headache? Oh, man, I didn't have a headache, but I've been taking these drops for 3 or 4 days, and it's like, oh, my headache. So, that happened so many times. I said, okay, so this is not working because what we've exceeded is the drops are actually facilitating the drainage of toxicity out of the extracellular matrix into the areas of the emunctories, into the lymphatic system, liver, kidney, etc. But the body, it can't get out of the body. And unless they can't get out of the body, it's like it stirs it up. So these people started to have headaches, for example, or maybe their joints would start to hurt, or they would start to itch in their skin. In other words, the body was starting to use secondary emunctories because the primary emunctories could not keep up with just using the homeopathic remedies, the 3 homeopathic remedies. And that usually happened within 3 or 4 days. And it's because of that, way back when, that I started to evolve the idea, because when I started to tell people, before we give you UNDA numbers, let's see how well you'll do with the natural laws, following basic treatment guidelines in general. That's when we started to see a much more dramatic progress, in their healing journey. And it doesn't take long when you take 50 patients, for example, and had been practicing for many years before that, and it's like, wow, I'm starting to see things that I hadn't seen and starting to understand some of the reactions that patients had way back when I would be doing nutritional therapy or homeopathic therapy or whatever I was doing at the time, that, it went back. It's always going to be back. What are the basic things that the patient needs to be doing? So if they're only sleeping 4 hours a day, don't expect the UNDA numbers to overcome what their physiology is telling them they can't possibly do. So hopefully that explains it, and if it's not good enough, tell Denise, and I'll try to explain it more.
Wonderful. Thanks, Dr. Tom. The next question is along those same lines, is when you exceed the detoxification limits, do you stop the regime, slow down the process, or change the UNDA numbers?
Perfect question. What a great question. Whoever asked that, thanks. People, anytime anybody does anything and they have what they consider an adverse or side effect, they always blame the remedy. Well, I'm going to tell you right tonight, UNDA numbers do not cause adverse effects, because UNDA numbers actually don't cause anything. All UNDA numbers do is support physiology. So if you're, for example, just talking about emunctories, if your emunctories are not efficient and you are stirring the pot, what it actually says is they're taking exactly the right remedies they need to take, because it's just happening too quickly. So you either need to back up, look at what the patient is doing. Are they following your other parts of your therapeutic regime? So what I always do, I don't stop them. I tell them, cut the number of drops in half. So you take half the number of drops. Do that for a few days. And if they still have problems, cut them in half again. And we reduce the dose until they're not having any problems. And then what we do is we start to ramp the drops up back to the normal regime of drops. And, well, I've had some incredibly sensitive patients, the most sensitive, and some of you will say, what? We literally put a bathtub, I don't know how many gallons of water you can put in a bathtub, We put one drop in a bathtub of water, and she took one drop. That's how sensitive she was. It probably took 3 months to get her to normal dosage. Thankfully, that doesn't happen for most people. But even if we're getting down that there's one drop is still, they're too sensitive, then what I have them do is just take a glass, water, put one drop in there and take one drop out of there. So I've done it, believe me, with having made over 100,000 UNDA prescriptions, there's nothing anybody on this call or anybody will ever tell me about an UNDA number that I haven't seen, I haven't experienced, I haven't tried to deal with, because this has sort of been my life for the last 25 years or so. So you're on the right path. It's not that people say it's the UNDA numbers. No, it's not. And if they tell you that, then they don't understand drainage. They don't understand the concept of drainage, and they don't understand the concept of what the UNDA numbers are supposed to be doing. That takes a big mind shift, because if you take a medication and you get a rash, the first thing is, I'll stop the drug, you're allergic to it. We're not having an allergic reaction to the UNDA number, because UNDA numbers don't work on that way. UNDA numbers work on systems, and they work on physics, biology, and physiology.
Thank you, Dr. Tom. That's wonderful. The next question, along the same lines, we've got some really great questions. Are there any situations where drainage would not be appropriate treatment option?
Whether it be in a situation, well, as I just said, in my over 100,000 prescriptions, I have never seen a patient that wasn't appropriate to do drainage. So my answer is no. Now, I'll qualify that. It is not appropriate with every patient to start off with UNDA numbers. Some patients, and may not give them an UNDA number for 3 months, 2 or 3 months. I need to see how their body responds to whatever else that we're, depending on what their issue is. So, but have I ever seen a patient, I guess another way of saying this, have I ever seen a patient where I said, oh, we can't give you UNDA numbers? And the answer is absolutely not. And there isn't any patient who I would ever not, obviously I'm always thinking about UNDA numbers with people, but definitely it's true that, some people have a lot of imbalances, and, I learned from so many mistakes that I made, and hopefully by this seminar, I'm going to be able to prevent you from making the hundreds of mistakes I've made over all the years. And, what you also have to remember is when I started, I had zero information. And I wrote that book because there was no information in English. So based on my years of experience of just trying these things, I had such a belief in the, when I first heard Dr. speak, and I was in Belgium at the time, back in the 90s, and he spoke for 7 days, I think. And I remember my wife was there with me and said, this is totally how medicine needs to think about health. Nobody thinks about health this way. Nobody thinks about physiology, physics, and biochemistry. All they think about is symptom, symptom, symptom. How do we suppress or palliate the symptom, and who cares what happens 5 years from now, generally speaking. So great question. Just be cautious, and I would say the more ill, if that's a proper term, a patient comes in when they see you, and in fact, on your intake form, if the patient lists, 16 chief complaints, I say to myself, this person isn't getting UNDA numbers, because there's no way. There's so many organ systems out of balance. There's so many imbalances in their system. I could give them just one UNDA number, which I don't ever recommend to do. If I gave them just one UNDA number, that probably would push them over the edge, and it's not worth it, because then they think, oh, these things don't work, they made me sick, da-da-da. But absolutely, there isn't any patient who you presently have in your clinic, unless they're really hypersensitive, and you'll have some of those like I do, or you have to be more cautious. But I would say that's probably less than 5% of my practice, and I have some pretty chronically and critically ill people that I've treated over my entire career. And you know, the one thing I love about UNDA numbers, I have such faith in their effectiveness. And I have had, you know, some of the stories are in the book, but generally, you know, I could write another book on just, you know, the types of positive things. And, you know, patients come in, they could be doing 10 other things, and I said, you can keep doing them if you want. You don't need to change them. But I can guarantee you that when you start doing this, your effects will be dramatically improved. So that's how I would answer that question.
Wonderful. The next question from our participant is, can UNDA numbers be used with classical homeopathy?
Well, if you're a classical homeopath, probably the answer is no. However, once again, as I said, Dr. Guinaud was my mentor. Dr. Guinaud was a classical homeopath, and probably the most brilliant homeopath, of course, that I ever made. Some of you in homeopathy probably have seen Borky, which is a book that, where's my camera? There it is. Borky, which is a materia medica of remedies. So in France, if you open this book, you know, that was rewritten to the foreword, instead of this one saying William Borky, MD, June 1927, it said Gerard Guinaud. He wrote the foreword because he knew every friggin' remedy in that book. And he could tell you the remedies. Once again, I'm not a classical homeopath. I have no trouble giving a patient a single remedy, or remedies even, along with the numbers. Now, once again, that's me. Classical homeopathy will say, oh, that sounds like bastardized homeopathy. But the other thing, and we'll get into this in the future talks, everybody thinks that an UNDA number is a combination remedy. It's not a combination remedy. It's a single energetic complex. And, you know, I feel very fortunate to have, you know, been at UNDA on several occasions. Feel very fortunate to have, they actually showed me things that at the time they said nobody other than in their facility had ever seen. They showed me Kirlian photography of different remedies. And in fact, when I was first introduced to UNDA numbers, what they were putting on the box was actually not what was in the bottle, because they assumed that somebody would just duplicate it. But what's so unique about UNDA numbers is since it's an energetic complex, and you know, you can, you know, if we were, I don't have an UNDA box in front of me, but you know, if we were to read the, let's say the 5 herbs and the 1 metal that's in the remedy, and you just took them and put them in a beaker and, you know, and stirred them up, said here's, you know, UNDA 20, but it wouldn't work. And it wouldn't work because it's not the same energy. And what UNDA showed me by their Kirlian photography is if you don't make the remedies in the exact order as they were designed to be made, you do not end up with the correct remedy. So then they realized they may as well because what they developed was techniques to be able to see the energetic complex. In fact, UNDA became known in Belgium when the government said, what is this compound? We don't know what it is. They would send it to UNDA and say, can you tell us what this is? Because they developed their own techniques to basically analyze these types of, you know, very fine materials for what's going on. So as a result of that, you definitely can use UNDA numbers along with, instead of saying classical homeopathy, I'll call it single remedy homeopathy, which, you know, for me right now, I'm taking UNDA numbers, and I also took a single remedy. So I don't have any problem with it. And I've seen that work really more than a lot. It basically works all the time. And Dr. Guinaud did that with every patient. That's how he prescribed.
Wonderful. Thank you. The next practitioner question is kind of going back again. You mentioned at the start of the drainage, doing drainage too soon will make the person worse. How do you know when the organs are ready to be stimulated by the drainage?
That is a great question, and it's one of the most difficult to give this is, you know, look for this type of thing. So look at your 5 among trees is what I would say first. So, look at their bowel habits. If they're constipated, probably not, that may not be the best. If they're having urinary tract stuff, if they're having a lot of mental, emotional issues, if they're, getting short of breath, climbing a flight of stairs. So, in other words, they're behind the 8 ball, we'll say, generally speaking. So that's where I say the first thing you should introduce to these people is the basic treatment guidelines. Introduce them to a diet, have them get outside, have them drink water, and then have them come back in 3 weeks or so and see how they're doing. Now, if they're able to follow that and are doing that, you won't have to wait very much longer. I mean, that doesn't mean their constipation resolves or they'll be able to climb, run up 2 flights of stairs. It's not like that. It doesn't have to, it's not black and white. It's not like, if you can't do this, we don't do it. If you can do this, we will do it. I'm just more cautious. The only ones I'm really cautious about is, as I said, when we have 15 different chief complaints, and I said, I really don't know what organ system I would start with, and I'm very cautious about starting anything. I want to see what you can do individually yourself before I start doing these specific remedies. That's probably the best answer I can give you, unfortunately.
That's a great answer. One of your slides said ST8. What is ST8?
ST8 is a machine, sonar technology that specifically has these big, I'll call them electrodes that sit here, and they sit under your arm, sit behind your knees. And what it does, it stimulates lymphatic flow. It's one of the machines that we have in our clinic because sometimes people, they don't need a lymphatic massage every day, per se, but they may have a physical therapist do a lymphatic massage, or we use an ST8. It's a specific machine. If you sonar something or other, if you Google lymphatic drainage ST8, I'm sure you'll see the machine.
Wonderful. I'm going to add 2 questions together for us. When a patient is using UNDA numbers, should they increase fiber and should they increase water intake? That's from 2 different people.
Yeah. Once again, they're both, if they're not drinking or working towards half their body weight in water, the answer is yes, you should increase water. If their bowel function is less than ideal and you perceive that, looking at their diet, that fiber could well be, one of the main issues, then the answer is yes. But historically, to just generically say, oh, if you don't drink more water, if you don't take fiber, then I don't do the UNDA numbers. No, it's not, once again, it's not that black and white, but it's definitely true that, we want people drinking water.
Wonderful. I've got one last question for this evening. I was wondering which of the basic protocol guidelines are the most important to focus on if patients who are generally not compliant?
My response to that, because I obviously have the same issue that that practitioner does. So one of my questions that I ask 2 questions usually when I'm sort of gathered my information. What's your priority, and what are you willing to do? I mean, I specifically ask the question to the patient, and they'll tell me what their priority is. It's X, Y, or Z, and then I'll say, okay, that's fine. And what are you willing to do? And usually we often have a staring contest because they don't know what to say, and I'm not going to answer them until they say something. So they'll say something. I'll change my diet. I'll drink more water. I'll walk 20 minutes a day. I'll get outside 30 minutes a day. Whatever they say, that's what we start with. That's the answer. That's what I have found to be the most reliable, because when they come back, actually, another thought that I have. So this is your priority. This is where we start. So I usually then say, Excuse me. That as a place to start, based on what I've heard you tell me, et cetera, I think is really a reasonable place to start in your situation. Now, having said that, I definitely have seen other patients like yourself who have similar issues, who have similar challenges as you're having, and they have, in addition to walking or whatever they agree to, are willing, have done a few other things. Would you be interested in seeing some of those other things? And if they say no, I say, okay, so let's start here. But 99.9% of the patients would say, yeah, okay, what else are you talking about? And that's where actually we'll show them all the basic protocols, the water to get outside, move your body, et cetera. And I'd say if any of those sort of resonate with you before I see you again in a few weeks, try one or two of them. And by far, the majority, using that type of approach, by far, most patients end up doing 90% of the whole thing, even though they agreed to do one. I found that a very effective technique. And yes, I got non-compliant patients. And if they come in and they haven't done anything, in all honesty, I usually fire them. I say, I don't know what you expect from me, but since you're not willing to do the work, I don't know how you expect me to do the work, because it's not, you spend, if you see me once a month, you're going to spend, I figured it out one day, something like 0.005% of all the seconds in the month will be spent with me. So it means all the rest of the month is spent with you. And if you expect me in that tiny percentage of time is going to make a difference in your health, I don't think I'm the right doctor for you, because I know I can't do that. What I do know is I can support your physiology. I do know I can support the physics in your body. I do know I can support your biology. But if you're not willing to participate in this journey, I don't know how you expect me to be able to really help you. And, if you wish, I could easily refer you to another physician who perhaps could give you better help than I could. So my patient population, I'm happy to say, it's either a one-time thing, or two maybe if they come back on non-compliant, or they're lifelong. I have patients now 30, 35 years. So that's my response to that question.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Tom. That was a wonderful, lovely answer. I love that. And thank you, Dr. Tom, for an excellent webinar. And thanks for all of you for participating this night. Once again, you can find Dr. Tom's basic treatment guideline and his book. It can be found online at hbbhealth.net. If you have any additional questions, please contact your Atrium Innovations representative, and do not forget to take advantage of the 15% off and free shipping using promo code UNDA20 for all of our UNDA number compounds. And it's valid until June 8th. This code can be used up to 4 times. Please note that the recording of this webinar will be available on the Soroil site beginning next Wednesday, February 12th, until June 8th. Everyone registered for this evening's event can expect to receive an email with instructions on how to access the recording. Please also be aware that our medical advisors on staff are available to support you with difficult cases. If you do not have an account with us and you wish to do so, or if you have any questions that were not addressed during the webinar due to time restraints, please contact your Atrium Innovations representative. For Canada, it's 1-800-263-5861, and for the U.S., it's 1-888-737-6925. Thank you once again, and enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone. Good night.
Thank you, everybody. We'll talk again in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, your conference is now ended. All callers are asked to hang up their lines at this time, and thank you for joining today's call.